Ancient Egypt was thousands of years in the making, a civilization that created the world's first nation-state, invented writing, and built monuments that still stand today. The pyramids, temples, and golden treasures we recognize instantly, yet the true story of these people remains completely misunderstood. Here's what life was really like in the world's greatest civilization. Before the story, if these help you sleep, like or subscribe would be cool. Also, drop where you're listening from and the time. I check the comments and it's crazy seeing people from like Australia and Norway on the same video. Alright, tonight it's ancient Egypt. But before we go anywhere, get cozy, like actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. You open your eyes to darkness, complete, total darkness, not the kind you're used to, with streetlights leaking through your blinds or the soft glow of electronics. This is proper darkness. It's 19,000 years ago, and you're waking up on the hard ground of a shallow cave in what will someday be southern Egypt. Your body aches. Every inch of you feels the unforgiving rock beneath your thin animal hide. The air smells of smoke from last night's fire, your only protection against the predators that roam the savanna grasslands. Your mouth is dry, your stomach tight with hunger. This isn't a bad night's sleep. This is just sleep for the earliest inhabitants of Egypt. You hear movement outside as the hunters prepare for the day. You're one of them, a nomadic hunter who follows the great herds of wild cattle across this surprisingly green landscape. Yeah, green. This isn't the Egypt you picture with endless deserts and pyramids. Not yet. The climate is completely different. Wetter, greener, with seasonal rains that create lakes and support grasslands filled with animals. "Wake up," someone whispers, nudging your shoulder. "The oryx are moving. We need to follow. The aurochs, massive wild cattle, are the lifeblood of your people. They provide meat, hide, bone for tools. Track them, kill them, or starve. It's that simple." You emerge from the cave into the pre-dawn light. The sky is transitioning from black to deep blue, stars still visible. Unlike your warm bed at home with its reliable roof, here the elements rule your existence. The morning chill bites at your skin, your breath visible in small clouds. "Look!" Your hunting companion points to tracks in the soft earth. Fresh, from before sunrise. This is what survival looks like, reading the smallest signs in nature that most modern humans have forgotten how to see. You can tell from these tracks not just that oryx passed by, but how many, how fast they were moving, and roughly how long ago. Your small band of about 20 people quickly breaks camp. There's no time for breakfast. Eating happens after a successful hunt, not before. Your stomach will have to wait. Unlike you lying in your comfortable bed right now, these early Egyptians didn't have the luxury of regular meals. "We should check the high ground," you suggest, pointing to a rocky outcrop. "See which way the herd is moving." Side note, I spent weeks researching these early hunter-gatherers of pre-dynastic Egypt, and the most fascinating thing is how skilled they were at reading landscapes. They knew exactly which plants signaled water nearby, which animal behaviors predicted weather changes. Their survival depended on observation skills we've completely lost. From the high rock, you can see for miles across the savannah, and there they are, a herd of oryx, maybe 40 animals grazing peacefully about a mile away. Their massive curved horns catch the early morning light. "If we circle around," your hunting leader says, "we can approach from downwind." Now the real work begins. Your group moves with practiced silence, spreading out in a loose formation. This hunt will take hours, stalking the animals slowly, getting close enough to use your weapons effectively. These aren't guns or even bows and arrows yet. You're using spears and throwing sticks, primitive but deadly in skilled hands. I've always wondered how I'd fare if I were suddenly transported back to this time. I'd probably last about half a day before something ate me or I drank bad water. These people were survival machines. The sun climbs higher and the heat intensifies. Sweat runs down your back. Salt stinging the scratches from yesterday's trek through thorny brush. Your throat is parched. Water is carried in animal bladders and it's rationed carefully. Every resource is precious. Your group successfully brings down 2 oryx after a grueling 6-hour hunt. Now comes the butchering, using stone tools to carefully separate meat, organs, hide, and bone. Nothing is wasted. The meat will be shared among the entire group. Some will be eaten today, some dried to preserve it. Good throw, an older hunter says, examining your kill. Clean strike. The spirits favoured us today. These early people already had spiritual beliefs, connecting their survival to forces beyond themselves. They saw patterns in stars, in animal migrations, in the seasonal rains. Their worldview was forming, the very beginnings of what would eventually become the complex Egyptian religion. As night falls, your group returns to the cave. The women have gathered roots, berries, and edible plants to supplement the meat. Together, these foods provide just enough nutrition to survive. A fire is built and the meat is cooked. Wait, it gets better. These earliest inhabitants of Egypt left evidence of their existence, not in pyramids or papyrus, but in something even more personal. High up on rocky cliff faces at places like Kurta, about 100 kilometers south of Luxor, they carved images of the animals they hunted. So, imagine this. After the meal, with a full belly for the first time today, an elder takes a stone tool and begins to work on the rock wall of your shelter. By firelight, they carefully chip away, creating the unmistakable outline of an oryx. These aren't just decorations. They're a kind of hunting magic, a way of connecting with the animals and ensuring future success. The more we honor them, the elder explains, the more they give themselves to us. These rock carvings are the earliest art in Egypt, dating back to around 19,000 years ago. Some show hippos, others cattle, a few even depict human figures and boats, though the boats came later as the climate began to change. And speaking of climate change, that's exactly what would transform this green savanna into the Egypt we recognize. Around 10,000 years ago, the Earth's axis tilted slightly, by about half a degree. This tiny shift had profound consequences, gradually changing rainfall patterns across North Africa. The rains come later each year, an old woman observes as your group gathers around the fire, and they bring less water. She's right. Over your lifetime, you've noticed the seasonal lakes shrinking, the grasslands retreating, game animals are becoming harder to find. Your people have to travel farther for food, competing with other bands for dwindling resources. Fun fact that's not actually fun. This climate change wasn't caused by human activity like today's version. It was a natural shift that happened gradually over centuries, but for the people living through it, absolutely devastating. Imagine watching your entire environment slowly die around you with no understanding of why. Over generations, as the climate continued to dry, these nomadic hunters were forced to adapt. They began to follow the retreating moisture, moving closer to the large lakes that formed during the rainy season. One such area is called Nabta Playa, about 100 kilometers southwest of Abu Simbel in southern Egypt. Here's where things get wild. At Nabta Playa, these early people began to settle into communities, still relying on the annual summer rains, but they needed to predict exactly when these rains would return. Their solution? They turned to the night sky. When those stars, a tribal elder points upward to a specific constellation, Appear directly overhead. The rains will come soon. What archaeologists discovered at Nabta Playa is mind-blowing. A stone circle about 7,000 years old, the earliest evidence of how Egyptian weather forecasters became astronomers. They aligned its central stones to the circumpolar stars, stars visible in the night sky all year round. When the sun appeared directly overhead, the stones cast no shadow, signaling that the midsummer rains were approaching. Think about this. Thousands of years before Stonehenge, these people were creating astronomical calendars to track the seasons. And this obsession with aligning monuments to celestial bodies, it would define Egyptian architecture for the next 5,000 years. Every tomb, every temple, every pyramid would be aligned to the stars. The connection they made was simple but profound. If the stars and rain were linked, then this world and the next must be connected. The physical and spiritual realms weren't separate but intertwined. As the climate continued to dry, these people focused more on the one reliable source of water, the Nile. Communities began forming along its banks, taking advantage of its annual flood that left behind rich, fertile soil perfect for growing crops. Look at how the black soil spreads after the water recedes. An early farmer tells his child, "This is the gift of the river." This black soil, Kemet, in ancient Egyptian, would give Egypt its name, the Black Land. By around 5000 BCE, these communities were cultivating wheat and barley, raising cattle and goats, producing the food surplus that would allow civilization to develop. With food production came specialization. Not everyone needed to farm or hunt. Some could become artisans, creating pottery, tools, and eventually luxury goods. Others became religious specialists, responsible for rituals that ensured the Nile's annual flood. I was reading this old archaeologist's field journal from a dig in the 1920s, and he described finding some of the earliest Egyptian pottery. The part that stuck with me was how he could see fingerprints pressed into the clay, actual fingerprints from someone who lived 7,000 years ago. Like, you're literally touching the past. These early settled communities developed distinct cultures in different parts of Egypt. In the north, settlements clustered around the delta and the Fayoum. In the south, they centered around the Kena bend of the Nile. These would become the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, that developed into two distinct cultures. What they shared was the miracle of the Nile, which transformed desert into paradise. Its annual flood renewed the soil's fertility, making it some of the most productive farmland in the ancient world. Egyptian farmers could grow everything from wheat and barley to figs, melons, and vegetables. Other lands need constant work, says a farmer as he watches the Nile waters recede from his fields. Ours gives to us freely. This isn't an exaggeration. While farmers in Mesopotamia had to constantly maintain complex irrigation systems, Egyptian agriculture was relatively straightforward. Plant after the flood recedes, harvest before the next one comes. The land practically farmed itself. But along with developing agriculture, these early Egyptians were also developing something else, a unique perspective on death. Unlike their nomadic ancestors who might simply leave their dead behind, settled people needed ways to manage death within their communities. The body returns to the earth, an elder explains, as a community prepares a grave, but the person continues. This is where we first see the beginnings of what would become Egypt's most mysterious practice, mummification. It started naturally. When bodies were buried in the hot desert sand, they would dehydrate rather than decay, preserving the skin, hair, and nails. The Egyptians noticed this preservation and began to see it as significant. One particular burial from around 3400 BCE shows a body curled into a fetal position, suggesting rebirth, surrounded by pottery, jewelry, and other possessions. Everything important in life accompanied the person into death. The message was clear: death wasn't the end, but a transition to another state of existence. Here's where it gets even weirder. For the Egyptians, the preservation of the body was crucial because it housed the soul. A skeleton wasn't enough. The person needed to be recognizable to house their spirit for eternity. Even when dead, we must appear as ourselves, a ritual specialist explains. How else will our soul know where to dwell? Throughout Egypt's long history, this core belief would drive the development of increasingly elaborate mummification techniques. What began as simple burials in the sand would eventually become the complex process we associate with ancient Egypt, removing organs, drying the body with natron salt, wrapping in linen, and placing in decorated coffins. As settlements grew into towns and early cities, another crucial development was taking place: the emergence of writing. And you know what's funny about the world's earliest writing? It wasn't developed to express poetry or record history. It was created to calculate taxes. In the ancient city of Abydos, archaeologists found small bone and ivory labels dating to around 3250 BCE. Each was engraved with symbols of animals, birds, or plants, and was pierced for attachment to chests or vessels containing oil, linen, or grain. These symbols represented the regions producing these commodities, sent as tax payments to a central authority. Each mark must be clear, instructs an official as scribes prepare the labels. The king must know what comes from each district. These simple symbols gradually evolved into the elegant hieroglyphic script that would record the Egyptian language for the next 3,000 years. So yeah, bureaucracy and taxes literally invented writing. As these communities grew in size and complexity, leadership became increasingly important. Local chiefs competed for resources and territory. The inevitable clash between the distinct cultures of Upper and Lower Egypt is recorded on what many consider to be Egypt's founding document, the Narmer Palette. This ceremonial palette depicts the moment when King Narmer of Upper Egypt defeated his northern enemy, unifying the two lands under one rule. It shows Narmer in the classic smiting pose, raising a mace above a kneeling captive's head. This powerful image would be repeated throughout Egyptian history. Narmer has united the two lands, a herald announces to the gathered crowd. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt now rest on one head. Narmer became Egypt's first king around 3100 BCE, establishing the first dynasty and creating what many scholars consider the world's first nation-state. Egypt was now a unified country with a single ruler, a shared culture, and a central government. When the sun sets on this first day of unified Egypt, you find yourself not in a cave or simple hut, but in a mud brick house in one of the growing settlements along the Nile. The river flows outside, its gentle sounds filtering through the reed mat hanging in your doorway. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also the continued unfolding of what would become one of history's most enduring civilizations. As you lay on your reed mat, listening to the night sounds of ancient Egypt, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate how far these people had come, from nomadic hunters following herds across a vanishing savanna to the creators of a unified state that would build the pyramids and temples we still marvel at today. The story was just beginning. Unlike your comfortable bed with its soft mattress and perfectly stuffed pillows, this early Egyptian sleeping arrangement is basic. A reed mat on a slightly elevated platform, maybe a headrest carved from wood or stone to keep your head off the ground and preserve your hairstyle. But after a long day of farming, fishing, or building, even this simple bed feels welcoming enough. dawn breaks over a different Egypt now. The year is roughly 2700 BCE, more than 4,700 years ago, and the early nation-state has evolved into something far more complex. You're standing on the west bank of the Nile, watching workers stream toward a massive construction project that will change how we think about human achievement forever. A foreman walks past, barking orders. Those limestone blocks need to be at the north face by midday. The king wants progress. This isn't the construction of the Great Pyramid yet. We're still in the early phases of Egypt's Pyramid Age. What you're witnessing is the beginning of the world's first major stone building, the Step Pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara. Egypt has been unified for about 400 years now, ruled by pharaohs who trace their lineage back to Nama. These kings have been buried in large, flat-topped rectangular tombs called mastabas, basically glorified rectangular boxes covered with mud brick. Nice, but nothing revolutionary. But King Djoser and his brilliant architect Imhotep are about to change everything. Stack another level on top, Imhotep instructs the master builders, pointing to plans drawn on papyrus. Then another and another. The workers look at him like he's lost his mind. You want to build a mastaba on top of another mastaba? Yes, Imhotep says confidently. And then 4 more on top of that. This moment, this seemingly simple idea to stack mastabas of decreasing size on top of each other would create the Step Pyramid, Egypt's first monumental stone structure and the precursor to all true pyramids. I mean, picture this. No one had ever built something this big with stone before. It was like going from building log cabins to suddenly constructing the Empire State Building. The engineering problems they had to solve were insane. Saqqara becomes a hive of activity. Thousands of workers quarry limestone blocks, drag them on wooden sleds and carefully position them. Others mix mortar, shape decorative elements and carve inscriptions. It's not just a tomb being built, it's an entire complex with courtyards, temples and storage rooms. Imhotep's design isn't just big, it's revolutionary. When completed, the Step Pyramid will stand over 60 meters tall, almost 200 feet, with 6 distinct steps or levels. It's the tallest building on Earth at this time. The king's soul must ascend to join the imperishable stars in the north, a priest explains as you watch the construction. This monument creates the stairway for his journey. That's a key point about Egyptian pyramids. They weren't just massive tombs, they were machines for transformation designed to help the king's soul ascend to the heavens. Around noon, you follow workers to a canteen area where they receive their rations. The Egyptian state is feeding these workers well. Archaeological evidence shows they got plenty of bread, beer, fish, and even meat. These weren't slaves building the pyramids. They were skilled labourers, craftsmen, and seasonal farmers working during the Nile's annual flood when they couldn't tend their fields. "How many days have you been working here?" you ask a stonecutter as you share a jar of beer. 3 months this season, he tells you, taking a hunk of bread. "I'll stay until the flood recedes. The pay is good, enough grain to feed my family for the year, plus the honour of building for the king." That's something modern people don't get about ancient Egypt. Building these monuments wasn't just forced labour, it was part of their religious and social duty. The pharaoh maintained cosmic order, called Mawat, and ensured the Nile flooded properly, bringing fertility to the land. In return, the people contributed to his monuments. It was a divine pact that made Egypt function. As you walk through the construction site, you spot someone important, a man giving detailed instructions to the workers, consulting plans, and inspecting the quality of stonework. This is Imhotep himself, the genius behind the Step Pyramid. Imhotep wasn't born into royalty or wealth. Historians believe he came from a common background but rose through the ranks because of his brilliant mind. He was architect, physician, astronomer, and eventually high priest. Talk about career advancement. The dude went from commoner to practically divine. "See how these blocks must fit precisely," he tells a group of stonecutters, running his hand along a seam. "The king's eternal house must be perfect." Imhotep was so revered that after his death, he achieved something almost unheard of for a non-royal. He was worshipped as a god of medicine and wisdom. The Greeks later identified him with their own god of medicine, Asclepius. Not bad for an architect. Let's fast forward about 75 years. The Step Pyramid was just the beginning. Now we're at Giza around 25 and 50 BCE, watching the construction of the Great Pyramid of King Khufu, the largest pyramid ever built and the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing today. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Workers are setting in place 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons. The finished pyramid will stand 146 meters, 481 feet tall, with a base covering 13 acres. For context, you could fit St. Peter's Basilica in Rome inside this thing with room to spare. How do they move those massive blocks? You whisper to a supervisor. With great difficulty, he laughs. We cut the stone at the quarry, then drag it on wooden sleds. For the largest blocks, we need hundreds of men pulling together. Recent archaeological evidence suggests they also used clever techniques like wetting the sand in front of the sleds to reduce friction. The ancient Egyptians might not have had advanced technology, but they were masters at applying basic physics principles to solve enormous engineering challenges. Behind the massive wall now known as the Wall of the Crow lies an entire workers' city. About 20,000 people worked on the Great Pyramid, not all at once, but in rotating shifts throughout the year. Most were farmers who worked during the annual Nile flood when their fields were underwater. Others were permanent skilled craftsmen. Let's check out where they lived. You enter a section of barracks, long, narrow buildings with sleeping platforms for the workers. It's cramped by modern standards, with about 20 men sharing a dormitory-style room. The overseers sleep at each end, explains a worker, pointing to slightly raised platforms at both ends of the room. The rest of us sleep in between, head to foot. The workers' diets were surprisingly good. Archaeologists have found evidence they ate beef, sheep, goat, fish, and plenty of bread and beer. The state provided this food as payment, understanding that well-fed workers were productive workers. In the main workers' village at Giza, there's a designated area for food preparation. Massive bakeries churn out bread, breweries produce beer, and butchers process meat. The logistics of feeding thousands of workers daily was a massive operation in itself. 20 loaves per man, a supply master calculates, making marks on a papyrus sheet, plus 2 jars of beer, onions, garlic, and a portion of fish or meat. When the Egyptian state was strong, this system worked remarkably well. The labour was organised by a complex bureaucracy that kept detailed records of workers, supplies, and progress. Speaking of bureaucracy, that's another Egyptian invention we're still dealing with today. They had officials for everything, overseers of granaries, scribes of the royal documents, masters of the king's works. Every aspect of society was catalogued, recorded, and managed. Let's go inside one of the scribal offices near the construction site. A group of men sit cross-legged, writing on papyrus scrolls with reed pens. These are the accountants of ancient Egypt, keeping track of supplies, workers, and costs. 20 limestone blocks from Tura arrived today, dictates an overseer, while a scribe carefully records the information. 45 workers present in the east quadrant, 3 absent due to illness. Being a scribe was one of the best jobs in ancient Egypt. You avoided hard physical labor, earned a good living, and had social status. Egyptian parents encouraged their sons to train as scribes. There are actual ancient Egyptian school texts where fathers lecture their sons about the benefits of scribal education versus other professions. One famous text has a father telling his son, "Be a scribe, your body will be sleek, your hand will be soft, you are one who sits grandly in your house, your servants answer speedily, beer is poured copiously, all who see you rejoice in good cheer." Translation: be a scribe so you don't have to do real work, can sit around all day and drink lots of beer. While the pyramids were being built for the kings, most Egyptians lived in much simpler dwellings. Let's visit a typical Egyptian home from this period. It's made of mud brick, the perfect building material for Egypt's climate, staying cool during hot days and retaining warmth at night. The house has a central courtyard where much of the food preparation happens, surrounded by rooms for sleeping and storage. The roof is flat and accessible by an internal staircase. In hot weather, people sleep on the roof to catch the cooler night breezes. We do most of our living outside, explains the lady of the house as she grinds grain into flour. We only go inside to sleep or escape the midday sun. Egyptian furniture is minimal by modern standards. Reed mats cover the floors. Simple wooden stools and low tables serve for eating. Beds are wooden frames with woven reed mattresses. For a pillow, Egyptians use a curved wooden or stone headrest, not as uncomfortable as it looks once you get used to it. The house has no bathroom as we'd recognize it. A corner of the courtyard has a designated spot for a ceramic pot used as a toilet, emptied daily into the fields as fertilizer. Bathing happens with water carried from the Nile or a local canal poured over the body while standing in a shallow stone basin. We bathe daily, the woman tells you, noticing your interest. Cleanliness is important to us. This is true. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with hygiene by ancient standards. They used natron, a natural salt, as soap, brushed their teeth with frayed reed brushes, and even used mint as breath freshener. While the royals and elites might use elaborate makeup, wigs and jewellery, ordinary Egyptians dress simply. Men typically wear a simple linen kilt, while women wear straight linen dresses with straps that cover their breasts. Children often go naked until puberty. Sandals are for the wealthy. Most people go barefoot. In the fields surrounding the village, farmers work with simple tools, wooden ploughs pulled by oxen, hoes, sickles for harvesting. Egyptian agriculture followed a predictable annual cycle governed by the Nile's flood. There are 3 seasons, a farmer explains while checking the irrigation channels in his field. Akhet, the flood, when the Nile rises and covers our fields. Pere, the growing season, when we plant after the waters recede. And Shemu, the harvest, before the cycle begins again. This natural rhythm gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability. While other ancient societies struggled with unpredictable rainfall, the Nile's annual flood was reliable enough that Egyptians could build their entire society around it. Throughout the Old Kingdom, roughly 2700–2200 BCE, this system thrived. The king maintained cosmic order, the Nile flooded properly, crops were abundant, and monumental projects continued. Egypt was the superpower of its day, wealthy and secure behind its natural desert barriers. The pyramids of the 4th dynasty mark the pinnacle of this achievement. After Khufu's Great Pyramid, his son Khafra built the 2nd pyramid at Giza, the one with the Sphinx in front, and his grandson Menkaura built the 3rd, smaller pyramid. Together they form the iconic skyline we associate with ancient Egypt. But by the 5th dynasty, something was changing. The pyramids built by later kings were smaller, with less impressive materials. The massive building projects had strained Egypt's resources. Climate change was beginning to affect the reliability of the Nile flood. Political power was becoming more decentralized. Let's visit one final site before the Old Kingdom begins its decline. At Abusir, just south of Giza, King Unas has built his pyramid complex around 2400 BCE. What makes it special isn't its size, but what's inside. The walls of the burial chamber are carved with hundreds of hieroglyphic inscriptions known as the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in Egypt. These spells will protect the king in the afterlife, a priest explains, as artisans carefully carve the hieroglyphs. They will help him navigate the dangers, join with Osiris, and rise to the sky with Ra. The pyramid texts give us our first detailed look at ancient Egyptian religious beliefs. They describe a complex afterlife journey where the king must overcome obstacles, pass judgments, and transform into different divine forms. This religious tradition would evolve over thousands of years, but its core elements are already present. While Unas's causeway connecting his pyramid to the Valley Temple shows scenes of bounty and prosperity, it also contains a troubling image, emaciated figures representing famine victims. This rare moment of realism in Egyptian art hints at problems on the horizon. These are the Bedouin from the desert edges, an artist explains, painting the thin figures. They suffer when the rains fail, but such troubles could never reach the Black Land. He's wrong. By 2200 BCE, about 200 years after Unas, Egypt would face a series of low Nile floods, leading to famines, political instability, and the collapse of central authority. The Old Kingdom's end would plunge Egypt into its first dark age, a period of fragmentation called the First Intermediate Period. As the sun sets on the Pyramid Age, you watch workers heading home after a day of construction. They're tired but satisfied, participating in what they believe is the most important work possible, ensuring their king's immortality and, by extension, the stability of their world. They have no idea that the magnificent civilization they're building, with its massive monuments, complex bureaucracy, and elaborate religious traditions, will collapse within a few generations, that the divine order they take for granted is more fragile than they can imagine. Unlike your safe, predictable world with its weather forecasts and grocery stores, these ancient Egyptians live with constant uncertainty. One bad Nile flood means widespread hunger. One weak pharaoh means political instability. The monuments they build are, in part, an attempt to create permanence in an impermanent world. As night falls over the Giza Plateau, the partially completed Great Pyramid looms against the starry sky. Thousands of workers sleep in their barracks, exhausted from a day of hauling stone. In the nearby palace, Pharaoh Khufu reviews plans with his officials. And along the Nile, ordinary Egyptians sleep in their simple homes, trusting that tomorrow will be like today, unaware of the changes that will eventually transform their eternal empire. The Nile isn't flooding properly anymore. For the 5th year in a row, the waters have barely risen, leaving fields parched and granaries dangerously empty. We're now around 2180 BCE, and Egypt's Old Kingdom, the age of massive pyramids and centralized royal power, How can the king fail to bring the floods? A farmer asks, looking at his withered crops. Has he lost the favour of the gods? This is Egypt's first major crisis, what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a perfect storm of disasters, climate change bringing multiple low Nile floods, famine spreading through the countryside, and a weakened monarchy unable to respond effectively. Pharaoh Pepti II, the last significant king of the Old Kingdom, supposedly reigned for 94 years but ended his incredibly long rule as an ineffective old man. Think about this for a second. Imagine if Queen Elizabeth had stayed on the throne until she was 120 years old, increasingly frail and out of touch. The system just can't function properly with that kind of leadership vacuum. The collapse of central authority creates a power vacuum that regional governors, called nomarchs, quickly fill. These local rulers stop sending taxes to the capital, instead keeping resources to take care of their own territories. Egypt effectively splits back into the regional kingdoms it had been before Narmer's unification over 900 years earlier. Let's visit one of these regional power centres. At Moala in Upper Egypt, a nomarch named Anktifi has declared himself the effective ruler of his territory. He's had his tomb carved with an autobiography that tells us exactly what life was like during this chaotic time. I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked, Anktifi's inscription boasts. I never allowed anyone to go hungry in this province. Reading between the lines of Anktifi's tomb text, we see a man taking advantage of the power vacuum. He describes military campaigns against neighbouring provinces, claiming he's bringing order, but really just expanding his territory. He barely mentions the king at all, just one tiny reference to a royal name, almost as an afterthought. I am the beginning and the end of mankind, Anktifi's inscription declares, since nobody like me existed before, nor will he exist. Talk about ego, but his self-promotion reveals something crucial. Local strongmen were now the real power in Egypt. The divine pharaoh was increasingly irrelevant. The real suffering, though, falls on ordinary Egyptians. Anktifi's tomb contains a chilling description. All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to such a degree that everyone had come to eating their children. While that's probably exaggerated for dramatic effect, like, look how bad things were until I saved everyone, archaeological evidence does show signs of widespread malnutrition during this period without the coordinated response of a strong central government. Local areas were left to fend for themselves when the Nile failed to flood properly. Now, around 2050 BCE, we're in Thebes, modern Luxor. This southern city was previously a backwater, but it's becoming the centre of a movement to reunify Egypt. A family of local rulers named Mentuhotep, the war god Montu, is satisfied, are building military power and expanding northward. The South will rise again, jokes a soldier as troops gather for a northern campaign. Thebes will rule all Egypt. He's right. After decades of fighting, Mentuhotep II defeats the northern rulers based at Heracleopolis and reunifies Egypt around 2055 BCE, establishing what we now call the Middle Kingdom. Here's where things get really brutal. When archaeologists excavated Mentuhotep's temple complex at Dir el-Bahri, they found a mass grave containing about 60 soldiers. These weren't carefully mummified nobility. These were the actual guys who fought and died in the civil war to reunify Egypt. Look at this, an archaeologist says, pointing to a skeleton. Arrow penetration to the chest, and this one, massive head trauma, probably from a mace. These soldiers' bodies tell the violent story of reunification. Some had healed fractures from previous battles before being killed in their final fight. Others showed signs of having been finished off while helpless on the battlefield. All were collected and buried with honor in what might be the world's first known war cemetery. But the real horror of Egypt's civil war happened at Abydos, Egypt's most sacred site. This was the burial ground of Egypt's first kings, the ones who followed Nama and established the early dynasties. During the civil war, northern troops did the unthinkable. They desecrated these royal tombs, burning them and destroying the royal mummies inside. The vile deed, as later texts called it, shattered Egypt's physical connection to its royal ancestors. The sacred bodies of the kings, meant to be preserved for eternity, were destroyed. It was an act of cultural desecration almost impossible for modern people to fully grasp. Imagine if someone burned down Arlington National Cemetery while simultaneously destroying the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Mentuhotep Sing's reunification of Egypt was thus not just a political victory, but a spiritual restoration. He portrayed himself as the heir to the Old Kingdom, building a temple complex that combined pyramid and temple elements. He wore both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing the reunification of the two lands. "I have healed the division," Mentuhotep declares in an inscription. "The two lands are united under my rule as they were under the kings of old." The Middle Kingdom that follows, roughly 2050–1650 BCE, is considered by many scholars to be Egypt's golden age, not of massive monuments like the Old Kingdom, but of art, literature, and a more humanistic culture. The trauma of the First Intermediate Period had changed Egyptian society profoundly. Let's visit the new capital at Itj Tawi, near the entrance to the Fayum region. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs have moved the administrative center from Memphis to this new location, symbolizing a fresh start. In the scribal schools attached to the royal court, something remarkable is happening. A new form of literature is emerging, stories, teachings, and even what we might call novels. The best known is the tale of Sinuhe, about an Egyptian official who flees to Asia after the assassination of a king, lives among foreigners, and eventually returns home to Egypt. "Read it to me again," a young scribe asks his teacher, the part where Sinuhe fights the champion of retinue. The teacher unrolls a papyrus scroll and reads dramatically. "Then he came at me while I waited. I shot him, my arrow sticking in his neck. He screamed, he fell on his nose. I slew him with his own battle axe." This is entertainment, not just religious or royal propaganda. The Egyptians are developing a rich literary tradition that includes adventure stories, wisdom texts, and even love poetry. Unlike the formal, idealized art and writing of the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom literature often deals with uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and real human emotions. Another important text from this period is the dialogue of a man with his bar, essentially, a man arguing with his soul about whether life is worth living, possibly the world's first recorded exploration of existential despair. The Egyptian who wrote it, whoever he was, would have understood Hamlet's "to be or not to be" perfectly well. "Why do I remain alive?" the man asks his soul. "Death is before me today, like the recovery of a sick man, like going outside after being confined." His soul responds, "If you think about burial, it's heartbreak. It's bringing tears by making a man miserable. Don't think about it." So basically, a guy is contemplating suicide, and his soul is like, "Dude, chill, death sucks too." This psychological depth reflects a culture coming to terms with the trauma of civil war and social collapse. The old certainties were gone. The king wasn't an untouchable god anymore, and the promise of eternal order had been broken. The Middle Kingdom response was to create a more accessible version of Egyptian culture. Royal portraiture becomes more humanistic. Kings are shown with worry lines and expressions that suggest the burden of rule. Regular people can now access afterlife magic previously reserved for royalty. Coffins for non-royals are inscribed with protective spells adapted from the royal pyramid texts. "Even a craftsman like me can have an afterlife now," says a carpenter as he saves to buy his own inscribed coffin. "The gods will know my name." This democratization of the afterlife is one of the most important developments in Egyptian religious history. By the Middle Kingdom, even middle-class Egyptians could purchase funeral equipment with protective spells and images, essentially giving them access to the same afterlife previously reserved for kings. The economic foundation for this cultural flowering comes from massive infrastructure projects started by the Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Let's visit one of them, a huge irrigation project in the Fayum region, where channels and dikes are being constructed to control the Nile's flow into this natural depression. When complete, this system will irrigate thousands of acres, explains an overseer as workers dig channels. Even in years of low flood, we'll have water stored here. Senusret III, one of the most powerful kings of the 12th dynasty, exemplifies the new Middle Kingdom ruler. His statues show him with a careworn, almost scowling expression, a far cry from the serene, idealized faces of Old Kingdom kings. The message is clear: ruling is hard work, not divine play. "The king sleeps little, thinking of his people," a court official explains. "His ears hear the needs of Upper and Lower Egypt." Senusret III was also a military badass who led campaigns into Nubia, modern Sudan, to secure Egypt's southern frontier and control the gold mines there. Instead of relying on the traditional Egyptian approach of periodic raids, he established a permanent military presence by building a series of massive fortresses along the Nile. These Middle Kingdom fortresses were engineering marvels, massive mud brick structures with walls up to 11 meters, 36 feet high, and moats that would make medieval castle builders jealous. The largest, Buhan, had an outer wall over a mile in circumference. They functioned as military bases, administrative centers, and trading posts rolled into one. "These walls say to the Nubians, Egypt is here to stay," a garrison commander tells you as you walk the battlements. "No one passes north or south without our permission." Control of these fortresses meant control of trade. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal skins flowed north from Inner Africa, while manufactured Egyptian goods went south. The fortresses also processed copper and other minerals mined in the surrounding deserts. But Egypt's influence wasn't limited to the south. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt established trading connections across the Mediterranean world and into the Near East. At the port of Byblos in modern Lebanon, Egyptian merchants had a permanent presence trading for the cedar wood that Egyptians prized for shipbuilding and luxury items. Lebanon's mountains grow the finest cedars, an Egyptian trader tells you as a ship unloads at an Egyptian harbour. One tree can make a mast tall enough to carry a sail that moves a ship with 60 men and tons of cargo. Egyptian ships were technological marvels capable of navigating both the Nile and the Mediterranean. One of the most famous Middle Kingdom achievements was a trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, probably somewhere along the Red Sea coast of Africa. Recorded in detailed relief carvings showing exotic goods being brought back to Egypt. From Punt we brought frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals, boasts an expedition leader, even baboons and a giraffe for the king's menagerie. The Middle Kingdom also saw significant developments in everyday technology. Water clocks, improved pottery wheels, bronze working, and advancements in mathematics and medicine all occurred during this period. Egyptian doctors were famous throughout the ancient world, with specialized knowledge of anatomy, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. I found this old medical papyrus transcript where an Egyptian doctor describes treating a head wound. He examines it and says, "If you examine a man with a gash on his head that penetrates to the bone, you should palpate his wound. If you find that there is a swelling protruding on the outside of that gash, you should say about him, 'An ailment I will treat.'" But if the skull is actually split open, revealing the brain, the diagnosis changes, an ailment not to be treated, which is honestly fair enough for Bronze Age medicine. Despite these achievements, the Middle Kingdom contained the seeds of its own decline. Senusret III and his successor Amenemhat III had centralized power by reducing the authority of the nomarchs, those regional governors, but this meant the system depended increasingly on a strong king. When Amenemhat IV died after a brief reign, he was succeeded by a female pharaoh, his sister Sobekneferu. While she was a legitimate ruler, her brief reign, about 4 years, ended without a clear successor, concluding the 12th dynasty. The 13th dynasty that followed maintained the appearance of the Middle Kingdom, but with significantly less stability. In less than a century, more than 60 kings ruled in rapid succession, few lasting more than a year or two. Central control weakened, and Egypt began to fragment again. During this unstable period, new groups were moving into the Nile Delta from the Near East. Known to the Egyptians as Amu, or Asiatics, they gradually established themselves as rulers in the eastern delta city of Avaris. By around 1650 BCE, these foreign rulers, whom historians call the Hyksos, had gained control of northern Egypt, while a native Egyptian dynasty continued to rule the south from Thebes. Egypt was divided once more, entering the Second Intermediate Period, but this division was different from the first. Now, foreigners controlled a significant portion of Egypt, challenging not just political unity, but cultural identity. "They worship strange gods," complains a Theban priest. "They use curved swords instead of proper Egyptian weapons. They speak our language with strange accents. How can such people claim to be kings of Egypt?" Yet the reality was more complex. Archaeological evidence shows the Hyksos quickly adopted Egyptian culture, writing, and royal titles. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own deities. Rather than being simply foreign invaders, they represented the complex cultural mixing that comes with migration and integration. As the sun sets on the Middle Kingdom, Egypt stands at a crossroads. The confident, isolated civilization of the Old Kingdom is gone forever. The more cosmopolitan, internationally connected Middle Kingdom is fading. Ahead lies a period of foreign influence, followed by a new kind of Egyptian empire, one that will project its power far beyond the Nile Valley. In your modern bed, with its machine-made sheets and memory foam pillow, you can sleep secure knowing food will be available tomorrow regardless of weather or politics. But as you drift off in ancient Egypt at the end of the Middle Kingdom, such certainties are fading. The Nile may or may not flood properly. The gods may or may not be pleased. And foreigners with strange weapons and customs are moving into the land of the pharaohs, bringing both threat and opportunity to the world's most ancient civilization. Morning breaks over a divided Egypt. In the north, foreign rulers called the Hyksos control the delta from their capital at Avaris. In the south, Egyptian kings still rule from Thebes. We're in the Second Intermediate Period, around 1600 BCE, and tensions between these two kingdoms are reaching a breaking point. The Hyksos aren't what you might expect. Rather than wild barbarians, they're sophisticated rulers who've largely adopted Egyptian culture. They write in hieroglyphs, worship Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and use Egyptian titles. Their kings have taken Egyptian throne names. The current ruler calls himself King Apophis. They want to be Egyptian, a Theban official scoffs. They wear our clothes, use our writing, but they'll never truly understand Ma'at, that concept of cosmic order, balance and justice that underpins Egyptian civilization. To the Thebans, only a true Egyptian king can maintain it. What makes the Hyksos truly threatening isn't just their control of northern Egypt, but their military innovations. They've introduced new weapons and tactics that give them an edge. The composite bow, more effective axes, and most importantly, the horse and chariot. Let's visit a Hyksos military camp outside Avaris. Soldiers are training with these strange new weapons, particularly the chariot, a light, fast, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses. Egypt had never seen anything like it before. The chariot is a mobile fighting platform, a Hyksos officer explains to new recruits. One man drives while the other shoots. We can strike and move before Egyptian infantry can even reach us. This military technology was revolutionary. Previously, Egyptian battles were mainly infantry affairs, masses of men with shields, spears, and maces slugging it out. The chariot changed everything, allowing archers to rapidly deploy, shoot, and relocate. It was the ancient equivalent of introducing tanks to a battlefield of foot soldiers. The standoff between Thebes and the Hyksos deteriorated when King Apophis sent a message to the Theban ruler Sekenenre-Ptah. The exact contents are lost to history, but it apparently contained an insult so severe that it provoked a military response. The message complained about hippos in a Theban pool making noise and keeping Apophis awake in his capital hundreds of miles away, a court official whispers. It was a deliberate provocation. Whatever the message contained, the conflict escalated. Sekenenre-Ptah led forces north against the Hyksos but died in the fighting. His mummy, discovered by archaeologists in the 1880s, shows the horrifying injuries that killed him. Massive wounds to the head from what were likely Hyksos-style axes. 5 separate blows. A royal physician says quietly, examining the king's body as it's prepared for mummification. He faced his enemies directly, too directly. The struggle continued under Sekenenre's son